Welcome to Masonry's Contemplative Path Toward Wholeness, with me, Chuck Dunning. The content of this essay is much the same as in the third chapter of my fourth book, The Mystic Tie and the Way of Oneness. This presentation is delivered in a kind of contemplative manner, one that will help us look deeper into the meanings and relationships of the title's parts, and thereby gain a greater appreciation for the whole idea and how we can benefit from it. We'll do this by working backward through the 5 words of the title. The 5th word is wholeness. An important thing to note about Masonry's view of wholeness is that it isn't just having all the parts of something gathered together in one place, because all the parts can be piled up and the thing itself not actually be fully and functionally present. So, for example, when the Temple of King Solomon was complete, all the parts are said to have, quote, fitted together with exact nicety, end quote. That fitting together turned a bunch of stones and timbers into a whole building consecrated for sacred purposes. That is how it became more than the sum of its parts, which is a hallmark of wholeness. We know the temple is a model for the lodge, and not only for the lodge room as a physical place, but for us as a group, the members who come together to make a whole social entity. This social entity is the actual lodge. Our ritual teaches that we should work to ensure all parts of that social entity fit together with exact nicety, when it reminds us that peace and harmony is the chief strength and support of all well-regulated institutions, more especially this of ours. But this analogy of the temple's wholeness does not stop with the lodge. We enter a deeper layer of symbolism when we consider that the temple, and thus the lodge, is also a model for each of us as an individual human being. Each of us is an assembly of parts, not only in the members and organs of our bodies, but also in our psyches or souls. I've spoken elsewhere of this as the internal lodge. We are physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual creatures all at the same time. Those are the 4 major elements of our individual being. And while they may all be present together, it takes only a little reflection to recall how they are not always fitted together with exact nicety, how peace and harmony among them can wane, even seem to totally disappear, and sometimes for excruciatingly long periods of time. We all know what that's like. We speak of being torn about something, of feeling conflicted, of being at odds with ourselves. Despite our best intentions otherwise, we can do or say things we wish we hadn't, or not do or not say things we wish we had. In such moments, we are more fragmented, less integrated, less whole. But the extent to which the different parts of an individual are working together in peace and harmony is the extent to which one is more whole, more than the sum of one's own parts. Something inherent to this understanding of wholeness is that it is not an all or nothing condition. Rather, we can experience more or less wholeness from one moment to another. So our craft acknowledges that we have a natural desire for the peace and harmony of a more fully integrated and actualized wholeness in our lives. And it encourages us to pick up our tools and work toward fulfillment of that desire. And so we have come to the 4th word of our title, toward. It's important for us to keep in mind that we can always be working toward a greater wholeness, making general progress in it, but with the understanding that the work is never finished so long as we live in this world. We need to remember we are fallible human beings with minds that are simply incapable of fully grasping all the complexity and mystery of our own existence. We are going to make mistakes. We will inevitably grow tired, have moments of weakness, succumb to the effects of aging, and often simply fail to see and understand all the relevant factors and consequences for many of our decisions and actions. Keeping these realities in mind is important because it helps to spare us from two follies that often befall people seeking to better themselves. One of those follies is the unnecessary and unhealthy self-loathing and self-punishment that typically goes hand in hand with unrealistic expectations of ourselves. The other folly is the grandiose delusion of having arrived at some degree of completion or perfection from which we can never fall. It's also very much worth noting that the less we plague ourselves with these follies, and the more accepting and understanding we are of our own humanity, then the more prepared we are to be accepting and compassionate with the humanity of others. Like the Temple of Solomon, the vision of existing in the wholeness of peace, harmony, and unity is meant to inspire us to do the best we can with what we have, to persevere in the work, and to renew our efforts when we fail, which includes learning from our experiences and making changes that reflect our hard-won wisdom. Arriving at our title's third word, we consider that Masonry provides us with a path to follow in this work, a way traveled by others who have gone before us. Furthermore, our tradition gives us many instructions about how to travel that path, complete with ancient landmarks and elder brethren to help us know where we are and how to better manage whatever we encounter. It's not practical to examine all the particulars of Masonry's traditional path in this moment, so I encourage you to take this idea of a path with you and apply it in your own experiences of Masonic symbolism and fellowship. For now, let us construct a basic outline for how to travel that path as a three-step process that would be familiar to the craftsman of any trade. First, we must be aware of our tools and materials, the parts that make up the whole of our being. Second, we must try to understand how the parts relate to each other, developing our comprehension of their proper relationships with each other. Third, we put our understandings in motion, initiating actual manifestation by experimenting with the parts and adjusting them and their relationships in order to more harmoniously integrate them, to refine them further and further toward a state of exact nicety. By outlining this three-step process of awareness, understanding, and manifestation, we have arrived at contemplative, the second word in our title. Walking Masonry's path toward wholeness is a contemplative process, which is to say that it is one in which we are intentionally focusing our consciousness upon it. And we can amplify the process through contemplative practices like our ritual, the art of memory, mindfulness, meditation, prayer, study, and dialogue. And while this essay doesn't go into much more detail about how to practice these things in Masonry, providing such practical instruction is an important part of what all my books are about. At last we come to the first word, Masonry. And I want to point out that I'm not referencing other traditions like Hermeticism, Kabbalah, Rosicrucianism, or other esoteric traditions. I have studied and practiced and commented on such things for many years, and my Masonic experience has benefited from them. But the longer I have done this work, the more I have come to appreciate that they are not necessary pursuits for Masons wanting to get the most out of their Masonic experience. If we engage Masonry itself as deeply as possible, we don't need other traditions and systems to unlock its deeper mysteries. It is our own contemplative effort that is the key to unlocking those mysteries. So now let's reflect on how our craft encourages us to make such contemplative effort on its path toward wholeness. In fact, our tradition not only encourages, but strongly admonishes us to do so. Consider these 4 statements from the Texas Monitor of the Lodge. Quote, initiation is to be attained only after real labor, deep study, profound meditation, extensive research, and a constant practice of those virtues which will open a true path to moral, intellectual, and spiritual illumination. Masonry does not expound the truths concealed in her emblems. It displays the symbols and may give a hint here and there concerning some characteristic of its several meanings, but it must remain for the neophyte to search out for himself the more hidden significations. End quote. Quote, it, the lodge, is said to be opened on and not in a certain degree, in reference rather to the speculative than to the legal character of the meeting, to indicate not that the members are to be circumscribed in the limits of a particular degree, but they are met together to unite in contemplation on the symbolic teachings and divine lessons, to inculcate which is the peculiar object of that degree. End quote. Quote, he who would become an accomplished Mason must not be content merely to hear or even understand the lectures, but must, aided by them, and then having as it were the way marked out for him, study, interpret, and develop these symbols for himself. End quote. Widely recorded in most Masonic monitors is this teaching on one of our principal tenets. Truth is a divine attribute and the foundation of every virtue. To be good and true is the first lesson we are taught in Masonry. On this theme we contemplate, and by its dictates endeavor to regulate our conduct. End quote. When explaining the special nature of speculative Masonry, our monitors say, quote, it leads the contemplative to view with reverence and admiration the glorious works of creation and inspires him with the most exalted ideas of the perfection of his divine Creator. Our ancient brethren, in obedience to God's law, labored 6 days and rested on the 7th, thereby enjoying frequent opportunities to contemplate the glorious works of the creation and to adore the great Creator. End quote. In fact, for many jurisdictions, the first words of the charge at the opening of the lodge are as follows, quote, the ways of virtue are beautiful, knowledge is attained by degrees, wisdom dwells with contemplation, there we must seek her. End quote. In his Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, the Masonic scholar Albert Mackey further clarifies the relevance of contemplation to Masonry when he writes, quote, to contemplate is literally to watch and inspect the temple. The augur or prophet among the Romans, having taken his stand on the Capitoline Hill, marked out with his wand the space in the heavens he intended to consult. This space he called the templum, the Latin word for a designated or marked off area. The watching of the templum was called contemplating, and hence those who devoted themselves to meditation upon sacred subjects assumed this title. Among the Freemasons, the word speculative is used as equivalent to contemplative. End quote. Mackey was right about these words, speculative and contemplative. The root of the word speculate is the same root for spectacles, the eyeglasses we use to see more clearly. Thus, at the time when our forebearers began describing themselves as speculative Masons, the word speculative literally meant looking into the vast and deep possibilities of meaning in Masonic symbolism. Therefore, speculative was indeed equivalent in meaning to contemplative, and it should remain so for today's Mason. Now, it's important to understand that Masonic contemplation is not only deeper and more focused thinking about something, but also includes meditatively and prayerfully opening our hearts and minds to wisdom through intuition and inspiration. According to the legend of Freemasonry, Hiram Abiff would retire to pray in the unfinished Sanctum Sanctorum before drawing his designs upon the trestle board. Contemplation of this sort is a profoundly spiritual pursuit. Because our craft is religiously pluralistic and inclusive, we should consider the fact that contemplative practice is extolled by every great spiritual book and teacher in history. In the book of Psalms, King David says, "I commune with my heart in the night. I meditate and search my spirit." The Buddha is recorded as having said, "From meditation wisdom arises, and without meditation wisdom wanes." The Prophet Muhammad wrote, "Contemplation for 1 hour is better than formal worship for 60 years." In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells his student Arjuna, "In the still mind, in the depths of meditation, the eternal self reveals itself." Lao Tzu, the patriarch of Taoism, taught this: "Attain utmost vacuity, hold fast to quietude. This reversion belongs to the eternal. To know the eternal is enlightenment." And Jesus of Nazareth said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you. Seek first the kingdom of heaven." So we can see that Masonry's contemplative path toward wholeness involves turning within ourselves to develop greater awareness of all our parts, physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. Use deep thinking, intuition, and inspiration to refine our understanding of the parts and how they can best integrate with each other, and initiate manifestation through experimentation with the parts and by making adjustments among them as we learn and grow toward greater peace, harmony, and unity. Yet, once we enter the lodge, we are constantly urged not only to work on ourselves for our own benefit, but also to work for the improvement of our relationships and society. In countless ways, our craft teaches us that wholeness is not only something we should work toward internally, but also externally, because we are social beings. For example, let us recall this monitorial instruction from the Fellowcraft degree on hearing. And as I recite it, listen for the different parts and dimensions of our being, internal and external, that it addresses. Quote, "Hearing is that sense by which we distinguish sounds and are capable of appreciating the agreeable charms of music. By it we are enabled to enjoy the pleasures of society and reciprocally to communicate to each other our thoughts and intentions, our purposes and desires. And thus our reason is rendered capable of exerting its utmost power and energy. The wise and beneficent author of nature intended, by the formation of this sense, that we should be social creatures and receive the greatest and most important part of our knowledge from social intercourse with each other. For these purposes, we are endowed with hearing that, by a proper exertion of our rational powers, our happiness may be complete. End quote. Let's also revisit a portion of the Master Mason's monitorial lesson on the beehive, which says, quote, "It might have pleased the great Creator of heaven and earth to have made man independent of all other beings. But as dependence is one of the strongest bonds of society, mankind were made dependent upon each other for protection and security, as they thereby enjoy better opportunities of fulfilling the duties of reciprocal love and friendship. Thus was man formed for social and active life, the noblest part of the work of God." End quote. These are just two of the ways Masonry reminds us that the internal elements of our individual being and the external aspects of our social being are interwoven and inseparable parts of an even greater wholeness we are working toward. So, when we follow Masonry's contemplative path toward wholeness by trying to improve ourselves and our unity with others, by practicing awareness, understanding, and thoughtful manifestation within ourselves and in our relationships with others, what do we call that? Is there a single term aside from the term Masonry that sums it all up? I submit that the teaching on the beehive has actually already pointed to this question's answer by encouraging us to, quote, "enjoy better opportunities of fulfilling the duties of reciprocal love and friendship," end quote. In short, the one word that best describes Masonry's contemplative path toward wholeness is love. Love is the great work that our craft repeatedly urges us to contemplatively engage both internally and externally. The importance of love in Masonry is punctuated by the fact that the very last tool presented to a Master Mason is the trowel, which spreads the cement of brotherly love and affection. But by this point in the Masonic journey, the new Master Mason has already been taught many other lessons about love. Let's review some of the more obvious ones. Soon after entering the lodge for initiation, a candidate for the entered apprentice degree hears these words, quote, "Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity." End quote. And what do these words describe if not a relationship among members so loving that they regard each other as family? The new EA is taught about three principal tenets: brotherly love, relief, and truth. And while brotherly love directly addresses love, both relief and truth are described in terms that emphasize their roles in loving relationships. Soon after being brought to light, the new EA is dramatically reminded about the importance of charity as it is expressed through relief. In learning about the covering of the lodge, the EA is taught that the highest of the three theological virtues is charity, and that the infinite reaches of the lodge's symbolic form suggest the extent to which one's own charity should reach. With all this emphasis on charity in our craft, we should take a moment to examine it more carefully. The English word charity comes from the Latin caritas, which was used in translation of the original Greek of the Apostle Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. We get our three theological virtues from the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, which is an exposition on the nature of love and its supreme importance. It's the chapter that begins, quote, "Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I have become only sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned so I may boast, but have not love, it profits me nothing. End quote. At the end of that chapter, Paul says that after everything else fails, three things remain: faith, hope, and love. And then he clarifies that love is the greatest of the three. The Greek word used for love in that chapter was agape, meaning selfless love, not just generosity. It was later translated into Latin as caritas, which was then translated in some English versions of the Bible as charity, while others rendered it as love. In any case, it is clear that the theological virtue of charity is about more than generosity. It is about love in its wholeness. I strongly encourage you to read or reread, perhaps, 1 Corinthians 13 if you want to know more about the wholeness of this supreme Masonic virtue. Getting back to how our craft teaches about love, as stated before, the previous examples were some of the more obvious ones, but since we began with the last tool of the Master Mason, let's go a little deeper by contemplating the first tools of the entered apprentice. Consider the 24-inch gauge, teaching us to divide our time into a portion for our usual vocations, a portion for service to God and distressed brethren, and a portion for refreshment and sleep. Here we can see three divisions of loving effort. The portion at work is done to seek wages that we may better provide and care for others and ourselves, which is a loving thing to do. It may also be that we see our vocations themselves as forms of loving service to others. The portion for service to God and distressed brethren is a demonstration of our love for both. And the portion for rest and refreshment is an act of love for ourselves as well as others by ensuring that we have enough energy for the other two portions. Regarding the lesson of the common gavel, it is very much a labor of love for ourselves and for others when we strive to divest ourselves of vices and superfluities. While they aren't working tools in the physical sense, we should also consider things like the four cardinal virtues and the liberal arts and sciences. Each of them empowers us to be more loving of ourselves, other people, or the divine in some way. And the work of empowering ourselves with them is itself an act of love. All the way through every degree of Masonry, in every rite, every symbolic working tool and every resource is an instrument of love, which is to say that each reminds us of ways to be more loving in our actions, in how we manage our emotions, in the way we think, and in the way we relate to others and to the great architect of the universe. And it's very appropriate that Masonry teaches us these things in the symbolism and allegory of a craft, because a craft requires work. Taken as a whole, the great diversity of tools and resources on the Masonic path illustrates that love is much more than feelings like attraction and affection, and so it demands much more from us, including prudence, temperance, fortitude, justice, faith, and hope. Just like our souls, love is multidimensional. It can be experienced and expressed physically, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. One way this multidimensionality is demonstrated is by the fact that we can think loving thoughts or do loving things even when we don't feel loving in the moment. However, because the wholeness of love itself includes all the different ways we can experience and express it, the more we give ourselves to awareness, understanding, and manifesting love through contemplative practices like study, meditation, the art of memory, prayer, and dialogue, then the more love facilitates our own wholeness, transforming us both internally and externally. Indeed, such contemplative practice is love in action. Now, when we talk about love, it's very easy to take the attitude that it is just a touchy-feely thing, all nicey nice, flowing naturally in warmth and coziness. But that's a one-sided view of love. The fact is that it can be very hard work, true labor, to discipline ourselves to manage our emotions lovingly, to think loving thoughts, make loving decisions, take loving action, and respond with loving attitudes whether or not things are going as we would prefer. A commitment to live this way is hardly always easy and pleasant, and we all know that. So, Masonry's contemplative path toward wholeness, our loving craft, can be arduous. And so it is meant for grown-up adults who are willing to give themselves to the heroic quest of transformation into strong, wise, and beautifully loving elders. It is not a mere pastime for people unwilling to be free thinkers and outgrow lesser notions about who and what they are. Mature adults know that love presents us with challenges and conflicts, such as when we care deeply about people or things that clash with each other. Love brings us struggle, frustration, disappointment, grief, and regret, in addition to all the beautiful, sweet, and thrilling things of life. And we ought to remember that truth every time we see or speak of our checkered pavement. But in coming to terms with the diverse and complex nature of love and learning that love is always present, that love flows through both the pleasant and unpleasant moments of life, we can discover one of the great mysteries about love, which is its transcendence. Love has no opposite that can overcome it. Though we often speak of fear or hate as the opposite of love, we should note that these are the names of feelings, and as we have seen, love is much more than a feeling. We can feel fear or hate and still think and do loving things despite those feelings. So love itself, in its fullness, is both ever-present and transcendent, which is to say, it is divine, as has been affirmed by the saints and sages of many faiths. Love is therefore not only Masonry's path toward internal and external wholeness, it is the very essence of the peace, harmony, and unity that our craft holds up as the ideal for human existence at all levels. In other words, love is at once the destination of our path, the traveling of our path, and the path itself. Love is our work. Love is our wage. Love is our mystic tie. Given this realization, the ever-present questions for us are about how committed we are to work at Masonry's craft of love and fully engage its contemplative path toward wholeness. So, in closing, I invite you to join me in asking these questions of ourselves. How willing are we to keep looking for deeper awareness of ourselves and our relationships with others and with the divine? How willing are we to keep striving for a better understanding of these things? How willing are we to keep moving and manifesting in the most loving ways? Thank you very much for traveling with me in this exploration of Masonry's contemplative path toward wholeness. I wish you light, life, and love.